I'm Micaela. I'll be your moderator for our discussion tonight. Tonight's episode will take a deep dive into the back to school debacle that many of us are struggling with. But before I introduce tonight's panel of experts, I have a few quick reminders. Are you good, Josh? To ask a question or leave a comment during the broadcast, visit the chat room right next to the window of this live stream. Please note that the chat room is only available on desktop. So all our mobile users, you can email questions and comments to liveworkthrive@ScaryMommy. If you are one of the first 100 lucky folks to RSVP to tonight's event, Scary Mommy will be gifting you a cute makeup tote. So in order to redeem your pouch, listen for the redemption code coming up later on in this broadcast. You're going to need that code to claim your gift. We have some great sessions planned for the next few months, so please stay in touch with us on LinkedIn for the latest updates. Now let's get started. So this school year is going down in the history books as one of the most challenging on record. There are so many issues at play here that for many of us, it seems like there are no easy choices. I want to start by reading a quote from Nobel Peace Prize winning activist Malala Yousafzai that says, education apologies, we had a little hiccup there. I was just introducing tonight's panel, and we were mentioning a quote from Nobel Peace Prize winning activist Malala Yousafzai. So she says, education is one of the blessings of life and one of its necessities. So I think we can all agree with Malala that education is essential. And it's important to acknowledge that those of us who have choices this school year, albeit very difficult ones to make, not every family has a choice. And so staying home, if you so choose, is a privilege. With that in mind, I'd just like to remind everyone viewing tonight and participating in the chat room that the goal is to have a balanced discussion, share fact-based information from experts that will help each of us make the decision that is right for our own families. So now let's get to tonight's panel of badass women who, in addition to their impressive credentials, all four of tonight's experts are moms. So cheers to all the moms getting it done in a pandemic like superheroes. So it's my pleasure to introduce Amy McKinney, third grade teacher from Pennsylvania. She has over 15 years of teaching experience and the cutest classroom you have ever seen, which she shares as a resource for educators on Instagram at The Unique Classroom. Thank you, Amy, for being here.
Thank you, Micaela.
Also joining us is Dr. Kate Connor, Medical Director of the Rales Health Center in Baltimore, Assistant Professor of Pediatrics, Johns Hopkins Children's Center. Thank you, Dr. Kate, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And later in our broadcast, we will be joined by Karen Alford of the United Federation of Teachers in New York City, as well as Dr. Keisha Scarlett of Seattle's public schools. Dr. Keisha is a national leader in the movement for educational justice. So let's get to some questions for our esteemed panelists. Amy, let's start with you. The back to school debate is very polarizing. I mean, we've heard points of view from all sides. What things are common ground and universal for all teachers despite the many issues at play here?
Without a doubt, it's as you said before, it's unique to everybody. Everybody's has their own situation. But as a whole, I think that the feedback that I'm getting, that I'm hearing from teachers, from both my colleagues and from people that I've connected with online, is that we want to go back into the classroom without a doubt. We want to go back to school. We want to go back when it's safe. We're not sure if it's there yet. You know, there's just so much unknown that we are, without a doubt, we want to go back. I know I want to go back into the classroom, but I think what's in the back of my mind is that if we go back, everything's going to be normal. And I know that it's not going to be normal.
It's not.
But we want to go back when it's safe.
Of course, safety first. So let's talk about safety. Dr. Kate, I mean, I, for one, I'm a mom of two, and we've started to get the communication from school, kind of preparing folks for, you know, if we go back, what things will be like. One of the things that they've sent us is a daily health assessment that families do for everyone in the household, including temperature checks. Does that really matter for kids? Is it a false sense of security, given all that we know about asymptomatic carriers, for example?
Yeah, this is a really important question. Temperature checks alone are not going to be enough to give us, to prevent transmission in schools or to keep people who have COVID from entering into school buildings. And the reason for that is about half of people who have COVID infection actually do not have a fever. So we will be letting many folks in who could still have COVID, even if we're also doing the symptom checks. And these temperature checks, there's some controversy about many of the devices that are being used to obtain temperatures, the touchless thermometers, and their accuracy. Plus, they can be time consuming and take time away from the classroom and cause kids to congregate while they're waiting to get their temperatures checked, which we know is a risk when people are sort of congregated together. So temperature checks and symptom checks, when they're used, should be used in combination with other measures that we know decrease the risk of COVID spread. So masking, physical distancing, hand hygiene, and cohorting, or keeping small groups of kids and adults in the building together.
Got it. Okay. So, you know, looking at the spread happening rapidly across the US, some would say that a patchwork back to school strategy is doomed to failure. You know, even if you institute all of those precautions that you just mentioned, you know, what's happening in one district may not mirror what's happening right next door. Not to worry though, because our president is very enthusiastic about back to school and tweeted his exuberance last week. Here is a tweet from President Trump. I think we're going to put that up on the screen for everyone to see. Open the schools. To be honest, I had to look and make sure that was a real tweet. You can't make this stuff up. So let's hear now from Karen Alford. She is from the United Federation of Teachers in New York City, which happens to be the largest school district in America, over 18,000 schools. New York City lost over 23,000 residents to COVID-19 deaths. So, you know, it really rocked the city to its core. And with good reason, teachers there have a lot of concerns. Let's hear what Karen has to say now.
Hello, my name is Karen Alford, and I am the United Federation of Teachers Vice President for Elementary Schools. Our position is safety first. Safety first. Keep us safe. The educators matter, our children matter. We are asking our DOE to make sure that there are multiple measures of safety for each and every school. We'd like to, as a union, we'd like to see a more concerted national response that is thoughtful, strategic, coordinated, collaborative. And all too often as educators, it's starting to feel like our public health doesn't matter as much as the economy and as well as the political concerns that are happening right now. Let's think about what's best health-wise for people. Let's think about this as a public health concern and move the other stuff to the side.
I think she puts it so well. Amy, what are your thoughts on this need for more of a national approach to keeping teachers safe?
It's interesting because the feedback that I got on my through my Instagram, I actually put out a survey because I wanted to know what teachers were feeling. And as I said before, it is really unique. I did get quite a few teachers who responded to that survey saying that they were completely comfortable going in. They live in a small community. They don't feel like their community is as affected as some of the larger communities in the United States. So I'm personally, that's the feedback that I'm getting, a lot of people, overwhelmingly, the people that responded to my survey, I think it was 80% said that they were anxious going into this school year. But of those who said that they felt comfortable, felt confident, said that because of the community that they live in.
Right. So there's obviously a vast difference in comfort level in communities where the spread is still rising versus other parts of the country where transmission is relatively low. Dr. Connor, what do you say about prioritizing public health over politics and over the economy? I mean, is it really essential, or how do you find a balance between all three?
Yeah, so I think in response to this and the last question, I would say that we need to prioritize kids and families and teachers and schools. And that needs to come from the top down as well as from the community level up. The public health response, there can be guidance and support for a public health response and a decision making approach that comes from a federal government or a state government level. And the numbers are going to look different in each of these places. And it is critically important that we are using up-to-date, high-quality public health data to make decisions about bringing folks back to school and whether or not that's safe. Because within schools, we can do as many health and safety procedures as we want. And if there is a ton of transmission in the community, we are still likely to see transmission in schools. So I think that what we need is really leadership in ensuring that schools and public health agencies have adequate funding, support, and guidance to partner on deciding what are the metrics for safely opening schools, what are the cut points, and what do the numbers look like, and how do we make sure that we're assessing those reliably on a moment-to-moment basis to make smart decisions. Because there are some places where it may be safer to return kids and teachers to classrooms, and there are so many benefits of in-person education that if we can do that, great. And we want to make sure that we're able to pull back or not start if things are really not looking good from a public health standpoint.
For sure. So you mentioned, so many of the benefits of going back to school. And, already parts of the country have, announced that they are not going back, or they're perhaps doing a hybrid of, some in person with, maybe the rest of the week from home, remote learning. Amy, I wanted to ask you, how do you think that closing schools will impact the cognitive development of children? Tell us what might be at risk in terms of the social, emotional health of kids doing remote learning for this extended period of time.
Without a doubt, kids need to interact with each other. And so if we're not going to be in school, I feel like that is it's going to be a challenge for kids. I mean, they, just teaching them, being in person. I work in small groups. Most of my day is spent in small groups where I can be within, reaching distance at my small desk, so that I can make sure that I have their attention, so that they can answer comfortably. And what I found with the virtual teaching in the springtime, now granted it was, on the spot, we didn't mandate that the kids had to log on at a certain time, so it was asynchronous. But the learning, my concern is that the learning did suffer from that, because they're watching videos of me teaching a lesson, or even my colleagues, because we actually worked together to create lessons, and we could give feedback. But it was hard without being able to see their face and knowing that they got it. I did have times during the day when they could log in and that they could work with me on lessons. But even that was hard because there was distractions of younger siblings and pets and other things going on at home, and it was hard for me to really know that they got it.
Definitely a struggle, and also a struggle for parents too, right? Who are the ones sometimes monitoring and helping, in addition to having a job and having to, homeschool multiple kids at different ages. I mean, it's a stressor all around. Now, given that the schools that have, attempted or will be attempting to reopen are likely to see closures, intermittent closures, reopenings, a ton of disruption is likely to happen for most of us. Dr. Connor, do you think it's worth it? Is that up and down and potential risk factor worth it? I mean, should we just all hunker down and wait it out until it's safe for everyone to go back with confidence?
Yeah, I think the really annoying answer to this is it depends, which is to say that, again, that risk really depends a lot on the COVID transmission in the community. And I think that because there are so many benefits of in-person education, it is worth trying to do this if we feel like we can do it in a safe way. So that does not mean it's right for every place to go back in person right now. And most schools and districts that I work with have been planning all along for a hybrid model. Very few were planning to sort of return all the way in person. And the benefit of that is that what we're looking at now is a planned sort of flex situation, which is we do some online learning, we do some in-person learning, and we can flex back and forth between them. Now, practically speaking, does that work for anyone's schedule? No. And it does potentially give us the benefit of having our kids be able to spend some time in school under conditions where it's safe. So I think that if the public health indicators suggest that it's safe for kids and teachers to be in buildings or safer, then it is worth giving this a try and being really thoughtful about the way that we plan that return so that we minimize the risk of infection in school buildings, as well as minimize the likelihood that an ill child is going to result in the whole school going out. So, for example, if we're really thoughtful about the way we cohort kids in person, then we limit their exposure to one another and their risk, as well as teachers. And then a single ill child doesn't mean that the whole school is continuously closing. So I think there are ways to do that, and we have to do it very carefully with the right public health indicators.
So just to follow up on that for a minute there, I know we've talked about this flexing and potentially part-time schedules. What is the risk for parents or grandparents, let's say, if the kids go to school even 2 days out of the week and then they come home and they live with grandma, or they, go for a visit to, an elderly relative? Is that essentially, just breaking that bubble every time they go to school?
Yes, I mean, the short answer is it is breaking the bubble, and how much risk they have outside of their bubble depends a lot, again, on community transmission and also the way that the school has put health and safety procedures in place. So, for example, in districts where there's a ton of COVID transmission, and perhaps kids are having to take, for example, city buses to school, like in Baltimore where I work, that's a lot of sort of risk and exposure. If there's less community exposure and there's a more controlled scenario, they have distancing and cohorting and masking in place, then those risks are less. So the risk of a child getting infected, or anyone for that matter, has to do with how close their contact is with an infected person and for how long. So, to the extent that we can limit that, we decrease their risk of coming into contact with an infected person or getting infected. That being said, if the child themselves or a family member is at high risk of complications from COVID because of an underlying health condition or another issue, then that may change the calculus. So, as you said at the top, this is a really individualized decision-making process, and families should reach out to their primary care providers to try to get a better assessment of their own risk and the risk of a child in their household sort of leaving their bubble to go out to school.
Definitely. That's a really good tip for parents, is to reach out and really get a personalized recommendation from a provider that you trust.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about masks for a minute because, even as an adult, I'm finding myself, where's the mask? You get into the car to go, for that essential grocery run and you realize you forgot the mask and you got to go back. It's the new, like, put on your shoes that moms are, shouting at the door, like, where's your mask? So in schools, Amy, as a teacher with decades of experience of kids who can't even keep a hairband on their head for 5 minutes without fidgeting, how is the mask thing going to realistically play out in schools, both from a physical just attention perspective? I can envision kids chewing on them and playing with them and trading and god knows what else. But then there's also the more subtle things that a mask kind of remove from, your ability to see the kids, aha moments when they're, oh, they're really engaged in a lesson or when someone may be struggling. I think you mentioned teaching phonics and languages might be challenging. How does this look to you in your mind when you envision what's to come?
So yeah, that's been on my mind because it's one thing that I what I found is, like you mentioned, the essential grocery store run. When I go, I didn't realize quite so much how much my own facial expressions do, convey what I'm feeling to somebody. So if I want to say thank you, I can smile at somebody, but with the mask on, I'm not getting that message across, and I'm realizing that. So it's really made me think about this in the classroom. Um, you know, just the beginning of the year, getting to know kids, a smile really does go a long way. And if the kids can't really see my face, I mean, it's covering up, majority of my face, that's a concern. If I can't see their face, it's a concern because, like you said, it's the aha moment. It's social emotional well-being. I can't necessarily see if a kid is struggling emotionally with what's going on, because of this situation being as totally different as it is. None of us are used to it, and so just with what kids are going through. Um, Teaching phonics in third grade, the kids need to be able to see my mouth. I actually spoke to a speech language pathologist who said the same thing, that the kids need to see how the sounds are formed, and they need to see my face. I need to be able to see them, and also hearing. So, just wearing the mask, for those reasons, is a concern. I mentioned at the beginning, I want to go back into the classroom, but in my mind, I want it to be back to normal, and it's not. And so the other concern is that, it's going to be lecture style where I'm going to be up in the front of the room. I can't really leave my bubble. They can't leave theirs. And I'm finding that even, again, going to the grocery store, I can't necessarily hear other people. They can't hear me. And so there's that concern in the classroom. If a child is that far away from me, am I going to be able to hear them clearly? Are they going to be able to hear me clearly?
Yeah, I want to come back to what you said about lecture style in a second, but before that, to stay on the masks issue, Dr. Kate, tell us moms out there, do I need to go to Old Navy and order like 31 masks for every day of the week because I can foresee, they come home, they're gross, they're moist. What do we do? How do we prepare for this? Do we need one mask every day, multiple masks for a day? What does a parent do here?
Yeah. So I have heard masks compared to underwear, which may be a good way to think about it. So you probably need a different pair. You definitely need a different one for every day. You need a clean one every day. So it doesn't mean you need a new one every day, depending on how frequently you're going to do laundry. But you need a clean one every day. And the idea is that kids should probably have a spare with them at school or wherever they are going out and about, because either they bite on it, chew on it, share it with their friend, spill milk on it, et cetera, and need to change them. So in general, we recommend that you should wear a clean one every day and that there's a chance you may need to replace that one each day. So I don't think we need a million, but depending on how often you're willing to do laundry, you may want, at least 5 to 7.
Yeah, so this is just bad news for moms, and the laundry, the symbol of laundry is infinity, and I think it
Mhm.
just got amped up with the mask thing. Thanks for that tip.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. So we have had such a overwhelming response to tonight's session that many of the Scary Mommy community have, told us how they're feeling. And so I want to share right now a few comments from our audience. These are real comments left by Scary Mommies. If you're watching right now and you have thoughts or questions and you'd like to share them, please visit the chat room. If you're on desktop, if you're on mobile, you can email them to us at liveworkthrive@scarymommy.com. So here is a first comment from Rosanna S. Rosanna says, I'm mad that everyone is screaming that children need an education, but this country is so collectively stupid, they don't believe basic science. I hear you, Rosanna. Steph says, we are going back. We have had one case in my town since this started, and that person was sent to a larger city to be treated. I do not feel bad about my decision, not even a tiny bit. My youngest is so excited to finally be in school with his brothers. We're hoping for the best, Steph, for you. DFVXX1111 says, I'd rather regret not sending my child to school than regret sending my child to school. So, that is just a sampling of how folks are feeling. It's literally like you're pulling, each side of, your scientific part of your head, your heartstrings. It's just, there's no easy answer. So let's get back to something you touched on, Amy, with respect to, lecture style learning, because I feel like there are going to be so many more rules, and discipline is going to become, really amped up in schools where, before you may have had a child who was misbehaving and, maybe they have a timeout or they sit and read quietly or do whatever teachers do when a child is not behaving. But now there's an added level of tension and stress on any indiscretion, a child who removes their mask or, does something, doesn't wash their hands or, is not following protocol. Dr. Kate, I wonder if you could just speak to, given that parents are on edge, I'm going to guess teachers are going to be on edge with this whole situation and making sure everyone's following the rules. Are we at risk of passing on this burden of kind of COVID related anxiety to the kids? And, is that going to be too much for them to handle?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say in response to that is they already have it, and they're already feeling it from us. So, so I do think that that's something to sort of be aware of. Kids are really perceptive. I told my kids that I was going to be doing this evening and asked them about what we should, if you went back, do you want to go back to school? And my 6-year-old said yes, and they should put the desks 6 feet apart, and they should, so they are hearing and absorbing everything that's happening right now already. I will also say that it's my job to go to things like this and say, oh, we can normalize this. We can do a beautiful, developmentally appropriate, non-punitive approach. And I just yelled at the same 6-year-old for breaching somebody's space bubble. So like, we're not going to do this perfectly. And I think that we can, one of the reasons we send kids to school is because they learn how to be in the world. And I really wish that the way to be in the world was not this right now. And for the foreseeable future, to keep ourselves and our communities safe, things like mask wearing and distancing are going to be things that we're learning. So I do think that we have to be very careful and thoughtful about the way we approach this with kids. And when the public health metrics say it's reasonably safe for us to go back into buildings, that we go back into buildings with these multiple sort of safeguards in place, so that the kid taking off their mask because they're a kid doesn't mean that everyone is exposed, right? Because they're all so far apart, and they're also cohorted, and they're also doing all of these other safety measures. So it doesn't take away needing the public health, metrics to be okay, to be green light for us to go back to school. But if we put multiple of these measures in place and understand how those measures are meant to work. So I think if the adults in kids' lives have confidence in the system that is in place, to keep them safe and to keep their kids safe, then that will make it better. And so we need to make sure that there are systems we can be confident in place before we send kids or adults back into buildings.
Now, Amy, I feel like you are every parent's dream teacher. When I look at your Instagram, it's like you have the cutest pouches with scissors and the glues all organized. I mean, I could just like go shopping in your classroom. But, talk to me about these systems that Dr. Kate mentioned. I mean, are teachers thinking about ways to make social distancing fun, to gamify some of these protocols that are scary and really can make us stressed out? But I mean, you all, I mean, this is why educators are so gifted. They make learning and following the rules into, a fun thing that kids can really latch onto. Have you thought about, ways that it can be a little less scary in your classroom?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly what she said. The kids are very intuitive. They pick up on things. And so, what is concerning is that a lot of teachers are going into the school year, the teachers that are being told that they have to go back to in-person teaching, and the anxiety level is so high because of so many unknowns. And, there's so much information, it's almost too much, it's overwhelming. And so, for those teachers, I certainly hope that they can calm themselves down in order to then calm the nerves of their students. Because one of the things that I equate it to is that in state testing in the springtime, we don't generally talk in my classroom about it during the school year, but then we have an opportunity in the beginning of the in the springtime where I sit the kids down and we talk about what they're worried about, because they need to share what they're worried about. And it's sometimes it's just them getting it out. We have something called a worry jar, and they write their worries down and they put it in the jar, and it's just, all right, now it's my teacher's, my teacher understands that we share this worry together, kind of thing. But without a doubt, the difference between the kids, what they're experiencing at home versus what they're going to experience in school, I think is vastly different, because they're going to have so many more rules about what they can and cannot do in school. And so, we actually just found out today that I will be going virtual. I was really hoping to go back, like I said, in person, but again, our district decided that it just wasn't the right decision. But with the idea that, in my head, I was thinking that we were going to be going back to in person. This was the kind of thing that was on my mind about, it's not really about, in my opinion, not about discipline. I don't think it's appropriate to discipline a child because he's pulling off his mask, or he's getting up to go to the bathroom and he's walking within 3 feet of another student. This is just another opportunity to learn. So I think that's important to differentiate.
Definitely. It's going to be teachable moment after teachable moment. Let's just hope the one silver lining here is that we have a whole new wave of scientists, that these kids are going to be the ones to take the lead so that we don't have to live through another school year like this, right? So, quick interlude here for the folks that were some of the first 100 to sign up for tonight's event. You will receive an email from us if you haven't already. And that will indicate that you were one of the first 100 to sign up, and you are eligible for a free Scary Mommy tote. So reply to the email you received with this code. This is for you, Amy. Teachers Rock is the code. So Teachers Rock, please reply to your email with that. Only if you received an email identifying you as one of the first 100. Congratulations. Okay. So we're going to move on from here, and we're going to talk now a little bit more about the homeschooling issue. When we talk about online learning, we're hearing some students may like it. There was an op-ed in the New York Times from an 8th grader who actually talked about how there was less distraction. She was able to get her work done much faster. There was no commute. So, there are some upsides for some kids, but for others, online learning or homeschooling can be challenging. We're even now hearing about pandemic pods that are being created, where families with the means to hire a private teacher are creating small groups that will, teach lessons in their bubble. So when you hear about things like this, it's clear that pre-existing systemic inequalities that have always existed are now being brought right out into the open even more than they have been before. So let's hear now from a woman who is working to change that in Seattle. Dr. Keisha Scarlett is Chief of Equity, Partnerships, and Engagement at Seattle's public schools. Let's go now to Dr. Scarlett.
Hello, my name is Dr. Keisha Scarlett. I am the Chief of Equity, Partnerships, and Engagement in Seattle Public Schools. Children who have privilege in this country and disproportionately white children have superior opportunities. This idea about pods, of course, it's a great idea to bring young people together and maybe trusting relationships. To minimize their exposure and safety. They benefit from the social piece of this. They're able to have pods or micro schools, right? So maybe access to a credentialed teacher or someone who's able to really do that and keep them safe. What it is a recipe for inequality, right? It just exacerbates the inequities that children who do not have privilege have. So there are solutions to that though. Families need to be educated on sort of the opportunities to help them. We need to activate sort of the agency of an entire city, or towns, or however people, are living across in order to lift up these practices.
Well, the first thing is we need one of Dr. Scarlett in every school district in America, clearly. I could listen to her talk all day. She's just, speaking the truth. So Dr. Connor, what can you tell us, first of all, about the impact of COVID-19, statistically speaking, on low-income communities of color across the U.S.?
Yeah, I'm really glad that Scary Mommy is highlighting this issue and that we had the opportunity to hear that clip because deep inequities in both health and education have existed for low-income communities and communities of color. Since our country's founding, and they are deeply interrelated. So inequities in health impact education and vice versa. We know that in terms of COVID itself, communities of color are disproportionately affected. So Black and Latinx Americans are 3 times as likely to be infected with COVID-19, and they're about twice as likely to die from the infection than their white counterparts. There are a lot of reasons for that. Some of them relate to things like essential work. So either being an essential worker or absolutely having to work to keep your family sort of afloat, and how that results in folks being potentially disproportionately in higher risk scenarios, frontline jobs, grocery store clerks, et cetera, potentially needing to take public transit, living in potentially closer quarters, depending on housing situations. Also, underlying disparities in the rates of the chronic conditions that put you at risk for severe infection from COVID, and systemic racism in both medicine and healthcare and education that really have led to these deep disparities to begin with. So unfortunately, we have communities of color that are disproportionately bearing a burden of this pandemic. Those communities are also communities where the schools have been systemically underfunded. The public health departments have been systemically underfunded. And now we are asking public schools and public health and families and teachers and students who have already been so systemically disadvantaged to lift a safe return to school without the support and funding that they dearly need. And so the divides in learning and the divides in health could be perpetuated in any number of these situations. So really remembering that as we're designing return systems, whether they be virtual or whether they be in person, that we are thinking about these inequities and how we're building in, addressing them, and undoing systemic racism in those systems.
Definitely. And one of the things that Dr. Scarlett discussed with us, we didn't have time to play her entire interview, but she did talk about the need for those of us, whether we be educators, whether we be family members or, neighbors, to be actively anti-racist in our actions right now in this pandemic. This is the time, if there was ever a time, to take action. And so in thinking, as you mentioned, about the way we are designing the learning plan, I think we need to acknowledge it has to work for all students. So Amy, let's talk about some of the ways teachers, that or other colleagues have adapted learning to take into account, perhaps a home with multiple kids who all need to use one computer or have, limited access to technology that they rely on heavily for their online learning program.
So, like I said, I only just found out today that my school's going back virtually. So I don't know what the actual plan will be going forward, other than I know that they've talked about synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. But I can speak to what it was like in the spring and the concerns that I had then. So we are fortunate enough to be a one-on-one school district. So K to 12, every student is handed a device of some kind, whether it be an iPad or a Chromebook. And because the schools closed so quickly and unexpectedly, a lot of the kids left, especially in the elementary, they don't get to take those home, generally speaking. So they left without their device. They were given an opportunity to come back, but again, that really, depended on their own situation, of whether they needed it or could make it back or felt comfortable making it back to pick up their device. So what was left was that some students were home, like you said, with one device for the family. And even what I found is that even with, in one particular family I'm thinking of, 4 family members, both parents working from home and both kids learning from home, the concern wasn't so much the device, everybody had one, but the concern was the Wi-Fi. In that particular family situation, the Wi-Fi was so glitchy that she probably heard half of what I said on each day. The way it was in the spring, we did, like I said before, it was asynchronous in that we sent out lessons. We posted them on our Google Classroom. We sent out videos and we have websites that the kids could visit and that kind of thing. So they were doing a lot of the learning. A parent just said to me today, they didn't understand the math, 3rd grade math, and they were having trouble with it. It is a really challenging curriculum. And so there is that concern right there, that the kids don't understand it, that the parents are working because they have to, and they're not able to log on, even at the times when I was available. If I was available for 3 hours during the day, that both parents were working. And so they were relying on being able to catch up on the weekends. And so it is a very big concern. It's a concern that I had in the springtime, and it's a concern that I still have going forward, because we can mandate that the kids log on, but we can't control what their home situation is like.
Right, and not everyone can log on at all. In some cases, there's a digital divide where some communities are not even wired to access the internet. So let's talk beyond access. Dr. Kate, what about the kids who depend on school for nutrition, for health services, for safe care during the day? What does that look like when a school district shuts down for those kids?
Yeah, so I can speak from my experience. I run a school health program, and we have a school-based health center, which is essentially a pediatric clinic inside the school that's designed to serve kids who have barriers to accessing healthcare in other settings. And when our school buildings closed, our school-based health center was closed. We were able to pivot to providing telemedicine services for our kids, coming up against some of the same digital issues that happen in virtual learning. And we were very fortunate that we were able to do that. But I think that some of the lessons that were learned by a lot of districts in the springtime is that closing school buildings, unless we are in sort of an utter shutdown scenario based on the public health metrics, really limited kids' access. And what we're finding is that we know that food insecurity is increasing for kids and families in this climate, and that if they have to go to a meal distribution site that's at a school that's distant from their own home school, that they are taking public transit and waiting in lines, and therefore coming into contact with more infection risk. And we also know that when virtual school is happening and school buildings are not open and kids are not able to attend school, that parents have to look for another scenario, and that childcare has been a consistent issue in our country, particularly for vulnerable and marginalized families, for a long time. And it is even tougher right now, as some childcare centers and facilities are not open and or are not prepared to support kids in virtual learning. So I think these are some things that our most at risk families are not able to access when schools are closed.
Childcare is key. I mean, we got to figure out this childcare situation. Kamala, it's up to you. Sorry. Okay. So I want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the conversation with your child when you have to break the news that school is not happening the way they want it to happen. And so, while safety is obviously the priority, and we're not taking lightly, the risks involved in reopening at all. However, I've been speaking to, just anecdotally, friends and colleagues, and a few of us have started to talk to the kids and break the news that school's not going back. And every single parent that I've talked to has said that their kids have burst into tears. How do you navigate that situation? Are there any tips? Is there any language you could share with us that could help just ease that? Because I feel like it's really traumatizing for these kids to feel like they're being robbed of that, that independence. Dr. Kate, do you have any advice for the moms who are, breaking the news and it's going very poorly?
Yeah, my kids were not thrilled. Our district is going back entirely virtually, and they were not very happy about that. Yeah, I mean, I think that we have been having an ongoing conversation since spring to talk about why schools had to close. And why we have to do learning differently. And so if there are families in districts where that decision has not been made yet, then starting to have the discussion about what the potential options might be for school return could be really important, and kind of prepping kids for that. Kids, particularly young kids who have trouble kind of grasping this concept, like to be sort of called to action. And so thinking about ways that we can help them to take on this, first of all, we have to be very empathetic. We have to let them feel how they feel about this and express to them that we understand that this is really hard and that this may not be what they want. And in trying to help support them in pivoting to working towards online learning, having themselves think about how they are playing a role in keeping our communities safe, how online learning can be a way for us to be safer and to get ourselves ready for back to school to be as safe as possible, and that we're all sort of participating in that together. And frankly, I think that message is really important for all of us. I try to remind myself every day.
Do your part. I think that's a good way of phrasing it to kids, that we're all in this together and all of us matter when it comes to creating a safe community. I think that's a really good tip that, I'm going to use that one, Dr. Kate, because I don't know what's going to happen with my kids. So I'm so excited for the response to this conversation. It's obviously not one with any easy answer. There is no one, recipe for how, everyone should handle their own situation, certainly. But we've literally had thousands of people tune in tonight, and there have been a ton of questions in the chat room. So I'm going to read to you a few questions right from our live audience that have been submitted. So the first one is, let's take this one for Amy. We have a 3-year-old and a 21-month-old. Their school is requiring masks for the teachers and staff, but not the children at their age. Children in higher grades will wear them. Is this safe? Could we realistically expect children this age to keep masks on for hours at a time? So I guess this person is trying to assess, how realistic is it for smaller kids, under age 4 to wear a mask. Amy, knowing what you know about third graders, I mean, how do you feel about, asking a kindergartner to wear a mask?
Honestly, that's a tough one. My sister teaches kindergarten, and God bless her. I don't know how she's going to handle it, because she is going back in person. I'm actually going to lob this one over, though, to Dr. Kate, because there's a part of that question that I know I'm not qualified to answer.
Yeah, I think so first thing is, kids under the age of 2 should not be wearing masks because of sort of medical risks about that obstructing their breathing in a way that they can't sort of physically get out of if they're feeling uncomfortable, or sort of choking, or etc. But kids under 2 from a medical standpoint can wear masks and are not medically at risk from wearing them. So then moving on to like developmentally and practically, most kids probably around kindergarten age range can start to learn how to consistently wear masks. It is a learning process, and we will expect that it will not be perfect. And so we should be thinking about building things into classrooms that provide extra protection. So for example, there should be fewer kids in those younger classrooms so that we are doing what's called de-densifying. Like there's just fewer kids and fewer germs if we're not going to be able to mask. In littler kids, many childcares and preschools have exactly the recommendations that the participant cited. And because we think, based on today's best evidence, that smaller children seem to be less likely to transmit the infection to others, that probably there is a bit of an added layer of protection there. So that when we already know that we're going to have kids who are not going to be as good at consistently masking, we also have a sense that likely those kids are less of a risk of transmission.
Okay, so the kindergartners are relatively
Kindergartners are where we're gonna rubber hits the road.
All right. Okay, great. So, Amy, here's one for you. Some are predicting large numbers of teachers may decide to leave the profession, and it may become increasingly harder to recruit new young people to become teachers. Do you think this is a possibility?
Short answer, yes. And it's such a shame, because teachers, people who go into teaching inherently care. They care about the kids that they're going to be teaching. They care about the profession. They want to do the right thing, and they want to help. And they're feeling, for the most part, the feedback that I'm getting is that they're feeling like they're put in an impossible situation. So many of them that responded, at least to me, are young and have their own kids, and so then they have that double-edged worry. But yes, absolutely, I think that what's going to happen is that they're feeling that they're put into an impossible situation. It's not just for them about the content, it's about the child and the children, the group of children that are in front of them. And I think that they are scared. They're very scared.
The role of teachers has certainly evolved. I mean, we've seen teachers now overseeing lockdown drills for an active shooter. You guys are now taking on the role of healthcare provider. I mean, we're hearing about schools that don't even have a school nurse, and that burden is being placed on teachers. So I can imagine this is making people rethink, is this really what I signed up for? Okay, so Dr. Kate, here's one for you. As a parent and pediatrician, if your kids' school offered a choice between online and in person, what would you choose?
I'm gonna cue the chorus of "It Depends" and say, my kids' district, before they announced a couple weeks ago, our numbers were looking pretty good. So we had a relatively low rate of positive tests. We were not using our hospital capacity. Our rate of new cases was reasonably low, and our testing capacity was increasing. And at that point, I thought, okay, if we're doing this hybrid model with all the things in place, we were prepared to send the kids back to school. And then we started to see an uptick. So I think that it really depends on what the situation in the community is, and I would try very hard to err on the side of getting the kids back in the building.
For sure. So let's talk a little bit about substitute teachers, because I feel like one of the questions we're hearing a lot from folks. I know there was a comment in the chat room about, is a kid with the sniffles going to have to stay home for 14 days, or similarly, is a teacher going to have to, call in, and how are they going to find the teachers to cover all of those classrooms? So let's take the first part of that, Dr. Kate. How are they going to draw the line between a sniffle and the fact that literally every child in the world has a runny nose from November to March, versus COVID? So what's that, what's the metric for which the mom gets the dreaded school call from the nurse?
Yeah. So that net is going to be cast quite wide. So if we are going to, garner some mom and teacher and pediatrician social capital here, one of the things that I think we should be thinking about is advocating for testing capacity and contact tracing, and that specifically be arranged for schools, for teachers in schools and for students in schools, so that if a child has symptoms, and it wouldn't just be the sniffles, but any, a couple combination of symptoms that could be a risk for COVID, would likely get a kid sent out of school or home from school. The sooner that we can make sure that kid gets tested and that we get the result back, or that adult, if it's a teacher or a staff member at the school, the sooner that person can return to school, the sooner their classmates can return to school, and the better information we have about how safely we're operating in that building. So we really need to ensure, in addition to there being a good environment in terms of the transmission of the virus in the community, that there's good capacity for testing, and that school systems have the support to get kids and staff tested quickly.
Okay, so all the PTA moms out there, we got to get on the testing campaign. Let's do this. We got to keep people safe with the testing. So Amy, how would this look in your, in schools? I know your school specifically is doing remote learning, so it's not as specific to your personal situation, but in a school where we're going back in person, how does the substitute situation work? I mean, I feel like with all of these new procedures and policies and hybrid schedules, and some kids are working from home, how does a substitute come in and take over in this environment? Is that even realistic?
So, as of last week, when I thought I was going back in person, we met with our superintendent and over Zoom, and these questions came up. The question about testing, if a student in our class ends up going home and being quarantined, does the teacher automatically have to go home? And does that mean that we would have to get a substitute? And the concern, and it's been in the news where, yes, there's an ability to have a 36-hour turnaround for the testing, but it's not necessarily the reality. In some places, it's up to 2 weeks. And so you could be without a teacher in that classroom for that long. And in the real world, getting substitutes in a normal situation, 2019, the school year last year, or before March, getting a substitute was very challenging. There were days when our administration had to be very creative in what to do with a class when there was no substitute to cover that class. I can't imagine, with the concern and the anxiety that full-time teachers are feeling, how a substitute would feel going into different schools and exposing themselves to different groups of students, but also just the idea that, is it worth it for them, to do this financially?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That is a tough one. Yeah. Well, I think we are almost at the end of our time here tonight. And so I just want to say a huge thank you to both of you. And on behalf of all the teachers and all the healthcare workers out there, especially the ones who are moms, we owe you a huge amount of gratitude. I mean, you are the heroes getting us through this pandemic. And the more incredible, strong women like yourselves that I talk to, I feel like we're going to make it. But, you know, with all of you out there rooting for us, taking care of us, helping our kids make it through, I really do think we're going to make it. So thank you so much, and please extend that to those that you work with, because parents are just, you know, all it took was one night of fractions for me, and I was like, every teacher in this world, double the salary, triple the salary. I mean, I'm not cut out for this at all. So thank you. I also want to just give a shout out to the Scary Mommy team of producers. We have brought you this show live from 4 different cities and 2 different countries. I'll say it again, when you put women in charge, we get things done. Kamala. And so also, speaking of women in charge, take a look at this slide with the upcoming badass women on our next virtual panels. So up next, we have Jo Frost, who you might know as Super Nanny, who will be joining leading pediatrician TJ Gold on a discussion of how to deal with too much togetherness on September 15th. And also Alyssa Milano will be featured in our October session on the female vote. We hope she's feeling better. I believe in the news, Alyssa was having some after effects of getting COVID herself. So sign up is available now on scarymommy.com/live-work-thrive. Get your name in there first, and you might be gifted a special gift from us. So just in closing, I want to just say and remind everyone, you know, whatever your school year looks like, we are in this together. We're going to get through this. It's not going to be an easy one, but we're going to make it. So stay safe, scary mommies, and have a great night. Thank you.